Hi everyone. Welcome to the Car Chat podcast. And with me today, I have Sam of Seen Through Glass.
I'm waving like people can see me, but it's obviously a podcast, isn't it? So it's like that kind of awkward thing where you have to say something so people know I'm actually here.
So Sam was on the podcast. I was looking back when it was. It was March 2020.
No way. Was it just before it all kicked off?
It must have been, because it was in person and that definitely wasn't illegal or anything.
No, I mean, no, it was in person. I'll say it's quite close as well. I mean, we were sitting right next to each other. I was lucky neither of our partners walked in. But yeah, no, there was definitely not a huge concern, which we probably should have been concerned at the time, but none of us knew what was coming, did we?
No, I think at this point in time, it was like everyone else's problem, not ours.
Yeah, it was like,
that seemed to be the attitude.
It's never going to get here. It's in China. Who cares? And then, we should have cared.
And then everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for those that don't know Sam, or Seen Through Glass as he is known online, what do you do? Just as a little summary.
I always say to people, and maybe I said this on the last episode, I'm a bad rip-off of Top Gear. So think of all the challenges, the road trips, the adventures. That's what I'm trying to replicate on my channel in a very budget and half-assed way. I'm a car channel, but I don't like to think of myself as a journalistic channel. I guess we're going to get into the fact that unfortunately, because of everything going on in the world, I've ended up doing lots of car reviews, but that's not why I got into the game. It was to be, a version of Clarkson where I got to go on huge trips with my mates in cool cars.
Have you never planned on doing any car reviews?
Oh no, and I hate doing them now. Like I never got. I'm not a journalistic kind of guy. Firstly, I don't have the vocabulary. I've never read a book in my life, and so I just don't know how to get words out of my mouth. And then also like phrases and sayings, I always get them wrong. Like another string from my tree, and so having to review a car, I'm like, this is too much pressure. So all I wanted to do was go places, do cool things with cars. Then if I'm like, oh wow, it sounds amazing, or wow, it feels so quick, cool anecdotal information. But what I hate doing, which is what I've ended up doing the last 18 months, is go for a test drive on a road and go, the best thing about this car and the worst thing about this car. Because I don't know, it's not what I wanted to do, but it's what I've ended up doing.
It's tricky, isn't it? That one about saying the wrong things. I spoke to someone recently and they kept using the phrase, how long's a piece of string? But they kept using it at completely the wrong time. And every time you said it, I was like, you're an idiot. Like, can someone just, I'm not going to tell you because I'm not an asshole, but you need to stop using this because everyone keeps thinking it's really weird.
I feel like Ron Burgundy, when in Rome, I just like constant. And as I'm saying them, I'm like, that's not right, but I'm going to have the confidence to roll with it that hopefully no one will really notice. But because I'm on social media, everyone does. So I haven't got away with it. Let me turn my WhatsApp off because that's going to be incredibly rude for all of us. Exactly. Showing how popular I am. / hi mum.
Turn my phone off. So did you get a coffee in the end?
I got a coffee. So those that don't know, I moved into a studio last year in Brentford, which is on the same site as the Duke of London, who I don't really know how we describe, but let's say a classic car dealer, but it's so much more than that. But also here is a very amazing bakery / cafe, which is great because I get barista coffee whenever I need it or want it, but it's bad because they pump me full of croissants. I mean, literally, you cannot go in there and not buy a breaded good, which means my weight gain since moving into the studio has been quite horrific, but the coffee is here
some serious
and
gains.
It's good. Gains, the wrong kind of gains, the gains you don't want to make, but I'm calling it like zombie protection syndrome or whatever you want. I feel like I'll live off this blubber at some point, so might as well pack it on.
So you've moved into a new studio space. Now, weirdly, when we met in March, I think I had a space at Duke of London.
And I think I saw your space before I moved into this actual unit. Because we talked about it briefly.
Yours is on the ground floor.
So so I'm actually in quite a over the top space. It's essentially a house. I mean, it's massive and I don't need it. It's 2 floors. So I can drive in downstairs. I have stored 3 cars. I reckon I could get 4 cars in there if I parked them cleverly. It's a big space downstairs.
Nice.
And then upstairs, I have what's a sort of school classroom, and it's this huge blank white space. Those people are watching, I guess now. I'm right in the corner at the moment in the sort of podcast area, but there's endless, space here, which is pretty overwhelming, I'll be honest. But yeah, exciting at the same time. And because of everything going on in the world, my thought was, if I had a studio, should the zombies come, I should still be able to keep working within the studio. Fingers crossed.
Yeah. Well, have you got like a curtain around you at the moment?
Because it's so huge and empty, sound proofing or sound, what would you call that?
Deadening, maybe?
Yeah, sound deadening. Tricky. So actually I got a good tip from Merlin, the Duke of London himself, which was to hang stage curtains across the room to cordon off, and that will help trap heat. The problem is the ceilings are tall in here, so my curtains don't reach the ground. So they're great for sound dampening. They've made it much more acoustically but good, but they don't trap the heat at all. So I'm constantly freezing in here. So I'm praying for some better weather, because the other day I was filming downstairs and you could actually see my breath on camera. So I was like, this is not a good. If I don't get COVID, I'm getting pneumonia. So bloody hell. Honestly.
Is it nice? Actually, you had a studio space before this, but this is like a whole nother level with some parking. Is it nice? It must be nice having.
I think it's.
All of that.
Yeah, it's financially overwhelming because it's not cheap. But as someone who's, I ran the channel for 4 years from my laptop or on the road. So that was hotel rooms, my sitting room, whatever. And it's a hard way to think of it as a business, because you just all over the place. And so I really, coming back from my big round the world trip, wanted an office at least, somewhere to go each day and to have a bit of a regime. And that kind of grew as an idea. And whilst I moved into a small studio, really for the podcast, it was a podcast recording studio. This is much more what I had in mind because, I can film different stuff in here. I'm getting a racing sim set up in the corner at the moment. I'm really hoping to do live podcast shows. So when we're allowed to, having 50, 60 people come in and hang out, see some cars downstairs, have a drink and catch up, and then we'll sit down and record a podcast. So, I've got the space to do that. But right now, when nothing is going on in the world and no one's making any money, the monthly payment does make me feel a bit sick. And I sit here just looking at the walls going, it's a lot of space, isn't it? So I do have some sleepless nights, but I am still excited by the idea of it. Unfortunately, the timing is just, not ideal for any of us right now.
No. Did you have a garage before then?
No, so
you didn't. Did you?
I've always, as and when required, rented parking spaces. Anyone else who's London. Also, I meant to ask you about that, about what you do with your cars at the moment, because I know you've got a little bit of space at home, right? But not like hardly any.
So I'm in a different place now.
Oh no way! You've moved.
So that's why I don't have the office where you are. I moved, and then so I moved. I'm in a different part of London.
Oh, congrats! I had no idea.
That's a secret, but that's probably why you don't recognise.
I couldn't work out where you were. Yeah.
Yeah, it's. I've got 2 buildings.
Chill out.
And this is my office building. It's great. It's a bit like your setup here. I've got a garage downstairs.
Oh my God.
And this is the upstairs, which is my office. So I've got 2 garage spaces now.
So you've got
a drive
and good garage spaces. You're not like sort of having a heart attack every time you move the cars. Like you can fit them in there nicely.
Yeah, it's not one of those ones. I've looked around so many houses where it's a garage, but it's a garage for like a caterer.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was, because I think that was kind of what you had before, right?
Yeah. That definitely at the time formed my opinion of what car I could own.
Sure. Okay.
All of my cars up to that point, other than the Audi or whatever, would fit in the garage.
Yeah.
And then I remember James came round. I think it was when, I don't know whether it was a Speciale or when he had his 458, and we were going for dinner or something. He was like, can I put it in the garage? And there was nothing in there. And we put it in. It was like 2 centimeters each side or something. God. Like kind of almost had to climb out the window, and you're like, okay, I'm never having a car that wide in this space. It's impossible.
It's big city life for you, isn't it? It's big city life, which is, so I ended up renting spaces all over the place, which was a big downside to my McLaren ownership experience, was the fact that I had to drive 15, 20 minutes to go and pick it up each time.
To go and get it.
Which was the bore. So yeah, having this is amazing from that point of view where the cars are here and as I get lent cars, I can leave them here. I can film with them downstairs, you
can have them delivered, all of these things.
Exactly that. And one of the hardest things, and I know James actually has spoken about this before a lot, when you're out filming automotive content, finding somewhere to pull over to do the pretty shots or the walk arounds or like, is one of the most frustrating parts because you want to do it, but actually finding somewhere quiet and picturesque and not muddy and not somewhere where people are going to leer and jeer at you and hey, toss pot, is, and it can make a filming day really stressful. So having this, knowing that if it's pouring with rain or if I've run out of time and haven't found anywhere, I can come back here and still do all of that in a controlled environment. That's really refreshing and really reassuring. So there's lots of benefits. There's definitely lots of benefits, but as I said, I would like to have done more here by this point, but restrictions have been in place and it's limited. So I'm just a lot of planning, getting ready for the future.
Yeah. And I totally get that. And unfortunately being sort of screwed by the situation and these things are quite expensive to keep, but like you said, I've where I am now, I have a little drive that goes out of view of the street.
Amazing.
So if I want to take a picture or film a little anything, I can film it at home, and you can't see anything else. Perfect. And it's just like you said, it's a complete game changer to any of that stuff because before you take a picture outside your house, someone will come knocking on your door.
Yeah. Literally that. I mean, it happened before my old place when I used to live with my sister, and people would turn up and spot the cars and hang out. Or if I said I had a car coming, they'd come and try and spy it and stuff. So, hey, it's one of the things of being online. You got to expect sometimes that kind of attention. But yeah, it's hard to manage, and you don't really want it from a security point of view. So, that's another benefit of this space. So yeah, it's good. But yeah, if you as and when you can come and visit, you will walk in and go, oh, it's big. I mean, everyone says the same thing. Like, wow, that's a lot of space. Mainly because it's not full of anything. But anyway, we'll get there.
Yeah. So because you've had more space, I don't know whether the two has come hand in hand. You've acquired some more cars.
I know. I kind of went crazy, didn't I? Way, let's just buy everything.
So, okay, I'm just trying to think where we left it off. You'd just done Drive the World, or you'd been back for a little bit.
Yeah.
You had your 911T that you just... no, I don't think you'd even been to Litchfield yet.
I don't think I had.
Because we talked about it.
Yeah, I don't think I had. I think I went right at the end of lockdown 1, didn't I? I think I did because that was my... Oh, God
Lockdown
knows.
1.
Lockdown 1.
Really shit trilogy. Hopefully only a trilogy.
2 Lockdown, 2 Furious. But yeah, so I still had that car for sure, but I'm not sure what I'd done with it.
You definitely hadn't been to Litchfield.
Okay.
And then I remember it was like a couple of weeks later or a month or whatever. I think you went a little bit later. So you did some mods.
Mm-hmm.
Did you like it post the change?
I mean, it transformed the car. And I've said it to quite a few people that have PDK Carrera Ts, get that mod done ASAP. But at the same time, you get that mod done, all you've done is you've bought yourself a cheap GTS. It made the car that quick, if not quicker. I mean, it felt unbelievably powerful and responsive. Yeah. The issue that I had with that car, and we may have touched on this last time, is that despite everything I'd done with it, I didn't form an emotional connection with it. And when I was just driving it around London, I was like, what? Like the places I'd been, the adventures I'd had with it were so much more exciting in my mind than anything I could do with it here or in the future.
Yeah.
And I think the Litchfield mods was like a sort of last ditch attempt of like, okay, well, maybe if I give it tons more power and take off all the wraps and kind of change the way it looks a little bit, maybe that will make it exciting. And I did still really like it. I don't miss it in any shape or form. I think it was brilliant. And yeah, the Litchfield stuff really helped. But at the same time, it was costing me 1,200 quid a month, I think.
Yeah.
And I wasn't enjoying it. I was just like, oh yeah, there it is. The insurance was a lot and, all these different things. And so I thought, screw it, let's just move on. I've never been someone with too much sentimental value with cars apart from my Ferrari.
That's a good thing.
Yeah, so I'm always, let's change it up, see what else there's out there. And without sounding I don't know what I'm going to sound like, but I could always go and buy another one. Do you know what I mean? Like it's not a kind of car, this is not me selling a 250 GTO. The Carrera T's and Carreras and 911s, they're all over the place. And heck, look, here I am 12 months later in a very different, but a 911. So that was kind of always my thinking. If I really regret it, I can always go and get another one.
Yeah. They're not going to change massively.
And if anything, become more affordable.
But then you bought another 911.
Yeah, I bought another one. Because, as you know, better than most, Porsche's a cult. You just can't get away from it. It's in your blood. And I now want every Porsche. So basically the 911 I've ended up with, a 40th anniversary, so the 996 generation. It's the first time I've bought a car. Actually, no, I lied. It's the second time I bought a car for YouTube. The first time being the Citroen rally car for Snow Tour, but that was more for a trip rather than for YouTube. But
you're saying none of the other cars were bought for YouTube? No,
I mean I've always bought cars personally. Which, if you ask me if there's a sort of mistake I've made over the years, it's doing that because I've bought cars that people probably don't really care about or are that interested in. The 4C ended up being this fluky thing where that was kind of the first car that launched the channel, even though I ran the channel for about 6 months with a TT. When the 4C came along, everyone bought into that. But that's because I just generally bought the car out of intrigue and interest. But then along the way, if you look at all the decisions I've made, they're kind of awful for YouTube because they're kind of the cars that no one cares about and no one wants to see.
Lambo.
I mean, I haven't. I was tempted to at one point. But and even I've done series talking about what I should get next. And I've pretty much always bought the car with the least views. So, again, I'm not very good at being a YouTuber, but I couldn't stomach spending money on something I didn't really like.
Well, yeah, it's a lot of money.
And dude, I love cars. These are cars 10 years ago when I was sat at a desk 9 to 5, I dreamed of being able to buy and own cars. And because of what I do, I've been in a position where I can now go and buy cars that I really love. So why would I not and go and buy something that I don't want just to get views? But you should probably think, well, as a business, maybe that's the right thing to do. So, a lot of looking at myself and looking at my business during lockdown. And I thought, heck, let's give this a go. And the Porsche bug was still in me, and I was like, it's definitely
not going anywhere.
It's not going anywhere. And my plan with the Carrera T was to sell it, save some money, so that in a couple of years I could go out and buy a really special Porsche. But I thought, well, heck, let's just go and buy another one right now. And so the plan with the 996 was, what were Porsches like back then? Because they're a bit like with my 360. The 360 is kind of the cheapest Ferrari you can go buy right now.
And what year is your 360?
2002. 2002, and the 996 is 2004.
Oh, okay.
Which is definitely my era. But I was never a massive 996 fan, but it's the cheapest Porsche 911 you can really go and buy today. And they're starting to come into play. And I started to appreciate them more last year after seeing a few people pick them up and hearing a few stories. And I thought, hey, this is an experiment, an experience for myself. What are Porsches like from that era? Is it going to be horrible? Are cheap 911s the most expensive 911s? What's the experience going to be like? So that was kind of the thought behind it. There's a little bit of me wanting the car, for sure, and that's why I got the 40th anniversary rather than the C4S or anything like that. But predominantly the decision was, buy a cheap Porsche and run it as a car on the channel for content.
Now, this just sounds so weird, but I remember the 50th anniversary coming out, and it had the Fuchs wheels and stuff, 991 generation, and thinking like, it's kind of an interesting car, but whatever.
Sure.
Now looking back at it, I kind of think actually it's quite cool because it was a C2S with a 4 body on it and the cool wheels, and you're like, that's actually quite cool Carrera. But I didn't think, obviously there must be I didn't think there was any other anniversaries because I thought the 50th, maybe that was just 50 years, pretty significant. I didn't realize they'd done other ones.
There's a 30th.
Right.
There's a 30th.
I saw a 30th. In fact, one came to my house.
No way.
Like,
you wouldn't know. I mean, it really doesn't stand out, the 30th.
Is that 993?
964.
Yeah, it was a 964. This one had been played with a bit.
Okay.
Owned by, what's his name? On Instagram, he's Black Betty and Co.
Yes, you're right. Okay.
But yeah, that was kind of interesting. But yeah, so what is the 40th anniversary 911?
The way I describe it to people who know Porsche, the best way to describe it, I think, is a 996 GTS, a Carrera GTS.
Okay.
So it's that idea, because obviously the GTS didn't really come back or come to the 911 badge department until the 997 Gen 2. So it's all the best options for the 996 Carrera, plus a few little bits. So, for example, you get the uprated sport suspension, you get the uprated engine performance. It's in GT Silver, which at the time was only available in the Carrera GT. You couldn't spec it on a 911, so it was a special color. Special shot blasted polished wheels. You get the GT3 side sills and a turbo front bumper. Bit weird, don't ask me. You get a slightly different leather color inside, but most of them just option with sport seats. In the US, you could get the GT3 buckets as well. So yeah, it's nothing, and it's a Carrera 2 narrow body rear wheel drive. It's nothing out of the ordinary. It's just the best 996 Carrera that Porsche could have spec'd, if you know what I mean. So without being a GT product. So it's all the best components pulled together in a very light, narrow 2-wheel drive car. So it's like 1,300 kilos, which is the same as a 911R, or I think a GT3 RS is 1290 or something like that. So it's super light.
More, I think 1350 or something.
Oh wow, okay. So it's a super light car. Horsepower, oh god, now I'm going to absolutely shoot myself in the face.
I'm going to make a guess. Is it 300, something like that?
It's more, it's 360 or something, or I'm actually going to Google it. Yeah, because it's not that far off my 360. 911. 40th. This is so embarrassing.
40th anniversary 911.
Yeah, all the
Specs.
Porsche community are just like, you
345.
345. Okay, so not as much as I thought, but hey, we'll get there. But yeah, it's just a really intriguing car, because I really like the way it looks, because it's got the GT3 bits, the turbo front bumper, etc.
Yeah.
I like the fact that there aren't that many of them, less than 2,000 units worldwide. And it's got a bit of a story. I love cars with a bit of a story. The reason I chose a Carrera T for Drive the World, and rather than just a Carrera S or whatever, was there's something about it. It's just got something slightly different, even just the tassels on the door rather than handles. I like cars like that. So fundamentally, could you have found a Carrera S or Carrera 4S with similar options? Yes. But it's not a 40th anniversary. So heck, why not go for something a bit different?
Yeah. And was that a private sale or through a dealership?
Private sale, assisted by a guy who has one himself and is sort of big in that space. I asked him for a bit of help, and he managed to track the car down. Was up near Liverpool somewhere, and the guy had had it for 12 years or something like that, and was ready to move on. So did the whole PPI thing and tried to be a bit aggressive on the price. I think I did all right. I think, I could have been more aggressive, but at the time I was kind of keen to get cracking. So we sort of settled on a point where I was like, yeah, that'll be okay. I didn't know how many bills were coming my way at that point.
So the car was mint, ready to go.
Ready to go.
Yeah. That was the end of the story.
Yeah, no. I so wish that was the case. Well, I very quickly learned cheap 911s are the most expensive 911s, because the pre-purchase inspection that I got done flagged up quite a lot of stuff that freaked me the heck out. Yeah. And I sent it to a couple of people, and they all came back saying, oh no, actually, you know what, this really isn't that bad. It's the kind of stuff you normally see. Cost-wise, like 5K would be like your max, I would suspect. Okay, feel free to get quotes. I was like, okay, fine. So that's kind of what I used for negotiating. Then I got the car, took it to a few specialists, again, got quotes in, and it was all coming in at that kind of money, like, 4 or 5, maybe the expensive place was like 6. And I was struggling a bit, and eventually got reached out to by a company up north called Visac UK, who I think originally came just for advice. They was like, hey, we're fans of the channel, and what's going on? We work on these cars all the time. And chatting to them, they were just so friendly and so nice, and giving like normal advice rather than being like, stuff I didn't understand. And so I said, hey, why don't you guys do it? They got the car and very quickly found that there were many more problems. We've renamed it a whack-a-mole car.
Oh, nice.
Where everything that they peeled off, they found something else. And bless them, they were trying to be as reasonable as possible, being like, look, you could probably wait and not do this for, 6 to 12 months. Well, this isn't that bad. But I was just like, look, get it all done because I want the car to be solid so I can just get on and crack on and filming and not have to worry. But by saying that to a garage or a mechanic, it's like setting just fire to your bank.
Full restoration.
Essentially. That's what I didn't realize I'd greenlit them to do. Like inadvertently, I said to them, restore the car, nut and bolt. So we got to the end and they were like, oh, we'll send you the invoice. And I was like, yeah, cool. Came through, I was like, what? So that was a bit of a poop my pants moment. But they were great. I mean, my own fault for... I didn't need to spend that much money, if you know what I'm trying to sort of just, I didn't need to spend that much money, but I kind of wanted to. And hopefully now that's it. Fingers crossed I can crack on and enjoy the car. But it was a very eye-opening experience and very different to my previous Porsche experience with modern cars that just seemingly don't go wrong.
Yeah, or you just chuck them back at a dealership and
walk away.
Bill goes to someone else.
And I've been so lucky with my 360, maybe because I took more time finding that car. But also, I lucked into the people who are looking after it, a bit like I think Visac UK, where they've just maintained it so well. And so I've never had a big bill with my 360. Yeah. So I kind of went in a bit cocky, like, how bad can it be? Very bad. Really, really bad.
Yes, as percentage of value of car, quite high.
Yeah, really pretty horrific. So,
It's an interesting one that my GT3 has had all sorts of problems over the last 9 months. Not actually any problems with it, but just a problem that's been ongoing. The long story short, rear discs are nearly out, but they were missing 2 little bolts in them. I don't know how these bolts come out, but one on either side had disappeared. And car went back in to have its warranty renewed. I was like, you know what? I can still get the warranty from Porsche. It's pretty reasonable. Just do that, and then it's worry-free. I don't have to worry about a random fuel tank leak or anything down the line. But they were like, well, we can't get hold of the bolts, so the only solution is to buy a new set of rear PCCBs at £5,000 a piece.
So what?
Excuse me.
Give me my car back.
I need 2 bolts, and you're charging me £5,000 a bolt. They're like, well, you do get some ceramics with that. I'm like, yeah, but either way, I'm not paying that much for new ceramics ever. Like, there's better tech out there and whatever. So I took the car away from them and took it to, who did I take it to? JZM.
Nice.
I was talking to them a lot about refurbing discs and the options of changing discs and stuff like that. And we arranged to have my discs refurbed in the end, which is actually the way to go. It's much cheaper than buying a new set, and you end up with a new set effectively. Nice. And then you're still within Porsche warranties and stuff like that. But sent the discs away to this company in Germany. Enter coronavirus.
Hey.
Factory shut down.
Oh, good old friend.
Company went into administration.
Oh my God.
So I'm thinking at this point, hang on a minute.
Am
I going to get my discs back? Like, am I just going to have a car that has no discs on the rear? Luckily, using someone else. So because I hadn't sent them myself, I'm not liable for it. JZM have sent it away. So they were like, we're definitely getting you your disc back. Blah, 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 blah. Add like 5 months. The discs come back. They hadn't been refurbed. The company hadn't managed to refurb them, but they had put 2 bolts back in.
No way.
So I took the car back to have the 111 point check and warranty and yada, 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 yada. All good. There was a brake. There's a brake pad warning light, and JZM said you need to change your brake pads. Take it into the dealership. And I said, the warning light's on. And I'm like, you definitely need to change some of them. I don't know whether it's front or back, but they need changing. They check them all 4. They're completely fine, they say. So I said, okay, but I've been told they need changing. I've had it before where they wear unevenly. And so when you look from one side, they're quite fat and they look fine. But if you look from the back underneath or whatever, there's like none left. They're like, no, we've definitely checked. So I go to pick up the car the other day, drive 50 meters out of the dealership, boom, brake pad warning light comes on. So I just kind of stormed back into the dealership, sort of threw the keys at the man, shouted at him, but I was very unhappy.
Sure.
And then just left. And then I get a message 2 days later being like, oh yeah, so we got someone to double, triple check or whatever. And it turns out that they're 6 millimeters on one side and 3 mil on the other. So they actually need changing. And you're like,
oh, come on.
That in itself, and part of this has got me thinking, you go to some of these specialists and you start building, like running a race car, you have a list of all of the parts pretty much and when they expire and how, depending on the amount of time you've run them for. So, we can run the discs for this amount of days or whatever. The suspension components can do this amount of miles and then they need changing. Whereas I don't have that from Porsche. Not saying they couldn't necessarily give it to me, of the parts. And like, for example, even just like discs, sort of establish what your wear rate is and go, you will probably need to change this in 10,000 miles.
Yeah.
And put that in the diary and go, actually,
remortgage the house.
Yeah. And just start, and then whether it's, brake pads or whatever, or suspension components and all of the extra components that are not the ones, tires, which seem to get looked at a lot. I want a list of my car and the things that are degrading.
Consumables,
like
basically, yeah.
The diff. Yeah. How long before the diff is just wishy-washy and you're going to need to replace it? And make a list and start budgeting for that. So that when it comes...
But I bet a good independent could do that for you. I don't think Porsche are going to do it, but I bet a good independent would.
And that's it. And I think, okay, I've done the warranty again because it just seems like good value. But after that, 100%, my car's going to an independent and I'm going to get them to look at everything because it's better to know and
plot and plan. That's exactly it.
And you can decide, I want to replace this year. And they're like, you don't have to replace this. And you're okay. How long have we got?
That was exactly like with my car up at Weissach, because obviously 996 generation famous for IMS and RMS failures. It's all over the internet. You speak to anyone with knowledge or without knowledge, they'll tell you that it needs to be changed. And one thing that did need to be changed on my car was clutch, which basically opens up the point where you can change the IMS. Yeah. The guys looked at it and they're like, look, I'm being deadly serious. It's looking absolutely fine. Like, we've seen so many in like such worse condition. I would say that yours is a 2 out of 10 compared to needing a change. And I said, but we're there. Like, you've taken all the parts off. Why not just do it? And I think the part alone was nearly $1,000 like that. So hence why some of my bills added up so quickly. But I was just like, let's just do it. And they were great at every single job doing that, saying, look, change this now because you're going to get X, Y, and Z, or you can wait and you'll be fine. But at some point we're going to have to do it down the road and it might be. So that's what I mean. I think if you can find a good independent and say that to them, say, look, I just want to know our lifeline on all of these things. And I'm not going to hold you to it. I'm not going to say, right, if it breaks a month early or I need replacing a month later, I'm going to sue you. Yeah. It's just to get that gauge. Because as you say, when you're running cars like this, and your car's a lot more expensive to maintain, I'm sure, than my 911, these are big bills and you need to be prepared for them in some shape or form. But maybe that's the risk, the gamble that we're taking by buying slightly older cars. You're entering yourself into this unpredictable kind of world of maintenance.
Yeah, I think you are a little bit, depends on who you buy it through and all that stuff, and the price comes into it and whatever. If you can buy it, let's say your Weissach place was selling cars, I'm sure would tell you. They'd be like, this is what it needs, this is why it's priced like this, and you're like, you know what, fine. Like, I've got the knowledge, I can make the decision. There you go. And run with it from there.
If I'd had a more accurate quote on the PPI, I might have thought again. But it's where we are. And you know what? It's part of the adventure with this car. That was the whole point of this content. And that's why I was just about able to stomach the bill. I mean, I really had a proper nightmare when that came in. But I kind of thought, well, this is what I signed up for. And if this is it, fine. If in 2 months' time it goes back and it's another $5,000 bill, I will absolutely tear my non-existent hair out. But you know, I think that's what people want to know and want to see, because it's an attractive proposition. A cheap 911. Wow, they're looking cool. They're coming into fashion. People keep buying them, you know, and I could afford a 20 grand 996. Should I go and do it? Hopefully I'm showing people what it's like and what to be prepared for, and the potential pitfalls, but hopefully, fingers crossed, the positives when you get out the other side.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think of the advice I've picked up or heard over the years, and generally I'm spending more on cars, so I'm not necessarily, you're trying to get the best value of the car, but I think this applies to all cars, is you try and get the best. Everyone always says, like, try and get the best version of whatever you're trying to get that you can afford.
Yeah.
Like,
that's exactly it.
If the price ranges from 10 to 20k, try and spend more. If it ranges from 100 to 200k, try and spend more if you can, because chances are you won't have all of these unsuspecting issues. But you could get it on any car.
You could get it on any car. I think the thing that I've learned, especially with Ferraris, but across the board now in this modern classic era, is maintenance, is the history of maintenance. Because sometimes people look at it, and there was a big conversation we had the other day about Challenge Stradale that went on collecting cars for quite strong money. And there was at least on the listing, a sort of four-year gap in the service history. The car had only done 1,500, maybe 2,000 miles in that time, but a 4-year gap. Now that's, for me, a huge immediate red flag. These cars should be serviced or maintained every single year, even if they've done 0 miles. It's just, there are parts in the car that do wear. And that's the thing. I think when you're looking at it, that's what you want to see. And it's not about finding the car in the perfect spec. You're not about, I really want a blue 996 911, and therefore that's the only ones I'm going to consider. Find the best version, the most well-maintained. It's got the best service history. It's as tickety-boo as possible. And therefore, if you have to spend a bit of money for that and it's not your ideal spec, you're going to end up in a happier place. I guarantee and promise you, because, even if you're like, at least my car's brown, that's the color I wanted. But if you are never driving it because it's in pieces at some specialist somewhere, you're going to have a miserable time.
Yeah. And then there's always the case out there. There will be cars that are priced expensively that are not very good, and there'll be cars that are priced cheap that are amazing because someone's just kind of doesn't know the value or whatever.
Exactly.
But you need someone to go with you that knows their stuff, because that's worth their weight in gold.
100% pre-purchase inspection. I am a big fan of, whether it's your mate, a specialist, off to a garage, whatever it might be. Just know what you're getting into, and any normal seller, anyone with a decent bit of kit, is going to be totally prepared to and up for a PPI on a sort of sports car, on a premium car. Fair enough. If it's an Astra, they might get a bit pissed off if you're saying I want to drive it to the local garage for an inspection. But yeah, any kind of premium, every seller is going to be prepared for you to do an inspection of some shape or form.
Yeah, and often if you get it done and there's a bunch of work that's like needs to be done, they might do half of it.
Yeah,
they might do some of it.
Great bargaining tool.
Yeah, because you said, okay, well, you're trying to sell me a perfect car, and we now know it's not perfect. And
exactly.
It's going to cost $3,000 to get it perfect. So how about you pay that and I'll pay your price?
Bish, bash, bosh.
Yeah.
Look at us. We should start a modern classic car dealership.
Have you been driving it much?
No, because of COVID. So I got the car, I picked up the car, drove it down to London. That was a 200-mile motorway journey. It literally went off for repairs, I think, the week later. And then it was up at Visac right until just before Christmas. So I think whenever those tier 4 restrictions came in, it came back 3 days before that. And then I went down to my parents. I somehow managed to time getting the hell out of London really well. So didn't drive it across Christmas, did come back. And then I have driven it maybe two or three times this year.
Yeah.
And it's such a I'm definitely enjoying it. I need to learn it. I don't want to sort of pass too much judgment on it yet, because it's sort of very subdued at most times, as in it's a very nice car to poodle around in. But then I took it to a twisty road and it really came alive. Like when I started pushing on, it was really fun. And I think I need to kind of stretch its legs a bit more and go on a bit of an adventure with it and throw it around some corners to really start to bond with it. But every time I get in it, I really enjoy it, but weirdly, it's not compelling me to get in it that much yet. Because I think because I just don't know it that well. Do you know what I mean? So yeah.
And if you don't, cars, like, I don't know. I think for a car to deliver an amazing experience driving around London,
not a thing.
It needs to be like a Range Rover or something.
Yeah, literally. That's why I love a Bentley.
With a V12 or, something like that you can't.
Exactly that, mate.
It's pretty boring.
It's super boring. And so until I've spent a bit of time with it, I don't really want to pass too much judgment, and fingers crossed to get and do some adventures with it later in the year. But so far things are positive. It's got one little niggle on the on the gears still. It's very snickety into first and reverse, especially when it's cold. Once it's warmed up, it's
especially
kind of
when
okay.
you're going from fifth to reverse.
That one's a real bugger.
Keeps grinding.
I don't know what's going on. And so that sometimes as well frustrates me a little bit, but it's off to Porsche UK in a couple of weeks for a tiny little bit more work. And they're going to address that just to get that sorted. And then, yeah, as I say, fingers crossed, smooth sailing from here, and I can start to really enjoy it. But I'm glad I've made the decision, and I'm happy to still be in the Porsche owners community.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you don't necessarily want to, in a good way, like pass judgment on a car or even review stuff at the moment, because I feel the same. Like I think it's very easy for me to get in a car and make a decision like straight away, and kind of ignoring all of the factors that are possibly around me driving that car. Like if it's my car, that's one thing. If it's someone else's car and they're in the car, that's another thing. Even if it's someone else's car, that's a different factor. Are you on a road? Are you on a track? Are you in London? Are you on an amazing road? Are you in a country where the speed limits are a problem? All these factors that I don't necessarily, they massively affect how you feel about a car, and it's not the car's fault.
Totally that. And I think, social media in general has made our predetermined judgments, even stronger. There's so many times when I approach a car and I kind of feel like I already know what I want to say about it. But the biggest thing for me is I'm not a trained journalist. Like I don't, like I never learned, like that's not what the guys that do it, the Bovingdons, the Chris Harris, all these people, they've trained to do that as a job. They know how to get in a car, what they're looking for, how to analyze it. They've got, all these comparisons to make. I don't have that skill, that ability. All I can do is share my own personal experience rather than necessarily my judgment. So I really do try not to say, this car is good or bad, or I stay away from the understeer and the chassis. I don't know what I'm talking about. So all I try and do is whether I'm having fun or not. And I have to say, a video of yours that I loved was when you went down to GTO Engineering for that. But do you know why? Because it was literally...
I got so much flack for that.
But mate, it's all I needed to know about that car. You just couldn't stop giggling and going, wow, wow. And I went, perfect. That's all I care about. I couldn't care less how that car actually performs, because I could see from your face and your reactions that it was blowing your mind in one way or the other. And so for me as a viewer, but also as a creator, that's the route that I'd always prefer to go down. Watching somebody really enjoying themselves, I don't care if they're not putting every single, element into, or they're not saying exactly what's going on, because that's when I watch a Carfection or, a Motor Trend or whatever. That's when I want that. But for a vlogger or a YouTuber or whatever we're going to call ourselves, I just want excitement. I just want fun, excitement, and yeah. So if you got flag, I don't know why, because I applaud that video. I thought it was
a
awesome.
Full split. There were some people that are like, what are you talking about? You didn't even tell us anything about the car. And then there's some people who are like, this was amazing. This is exactly what I wanted to see. Yeah. And to be honest, I filmed that video. I had the car for half an hour before recording a podcast. I went to record the podcast and talk about it. And they just said, like, do you want to come and drive the car? Yes, thank you very much.
Sure, please.
Drove the car, just was like, literally, it was mind-blowing experience, especially because the day before I'd driven an F8.
Okay.
And I'd driven an F8 at Goodwood. So I had 3 laps of Goodwood, which I kind of almost like... that wasn't beneficial at all. And then I had 20 minutes on a back road, but I had an instructor next to me and I wasn't allowed to take the car out of sport, which is basically the standard setting, I think, on a car like that.
Yep.
And it just felt so numb in sport. And I just had no impression whatsoever of the power or any of the stuff that I imagine is fun about that car, driving it in sport. And weirdly, I had Andrew Frankel on last season, and I was telling him about this, and he was saying, you know what, in that situation, I'd rather not drive the car.
But I'm with him,
because I can't, because I slagged that car off afterwards. I was like, I think this is shit. Like, I really don't like it. And I talked to other people on the same day, and they were like, I'm not feeling it. And then, but I reckon if I'd been able to drive it in whatever race or CT off, or, just like sensibly but unsensibly experience some of because I think that car, if you drive it in CT off or everything off, will give you that kind of F40-esque manic, like you've got way more power than traction and you need to really respect the car.
I couldn't believe, because I had the F8 Spider just before Christmas.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe how different. I mean, that car is two different cars in sport and race. And I think this is Ferrari's new direction, or at least what they had to do with that car. Sport is an even softer 488. It's nearly McLaren 570 GT levels of soft comfort. It's quiet. There's very little sort of engaging power or motive power. You just trundle along. It's just like a super nice, comfy place to be with your music
put
on.
Your foot down.
Oh, honestly, like, you know, it's a Bentley Continental GT. The minute you flick it to race, and then especially CT off, it is an absolute monster. It's a pista. It is a pista because it's the same engine and it's essentially a pista rebodied. And so I think this is what all these supercar manufacturers have had to start doing. And the reason that many of us who prefer, you know, loud, shouty, crazy cars are saying, oh, they've all died down a bit. It's because they need to be more accessible. They've made them more accessible from the everyday person who gets in, who doesn't always want to be thrashing it, doesn't always want to be going all out. Maybe a younger market or a slightly different market, the Asian market, the UAE market, whatever it might be. That is cruising. That is cruising.
You know, there's always a time for that level of traction control and everything. It's wet, it's dark, it's the end of the day. You've actually just had fun doing something else and you just want to get home. You don't want to have to
totally
manipulate your right foot with 700 plus horsepower.
But you also want to be able to extract that power when you do, and not being allowed to switch it to race means you're going to experience a completely bizarre car. You know, if they were like, this is it, I agree. I would have been like, what? And funnily enough, I remember sending a voice note to somebody the moment I picked up the car and drove it home. I was like, it feels a bit wobbly, the Spider, like I feel like the flex and it's boring and like, why would you have it? And then I took it to a road the next day, into race, perfect road, quiet roads. It was a bit slippery and I was like, oh my God, you know, so, you know, I'm with you there. So I can imagine that GTO engineering experience must have just been so aggressively night and day from an F8 in sport mode. No wonder you were like,
I know. Yeah. And I was aware, like I properly slagged off the F8 for a good, like everyone I met, everyone that asked me about it, I was like, it was crap. and that is exactly the conditions that I were given at the time. It wasn't very good for me at all. It wasn't very good. And that could have been completely different. I totally understand why they do it, because you don't just let everyone do these things.
It's a car that would happily crash.
But I feel a little bit bad, but I don't feel bad because at the time I asked if I could do it. They said, no, fine, your car, your money, whatever. But that's the impression I got after it. And I would love to drive one again. And
but you're not wrong.
Actually it's an amazing car.
Yeah, but you're not, sorry to interrupt, but you're not wrong, because in sport mode it is dull. You know, it is dull. It's not a Ferrari, you know, and for me as a purist, I was like, what is this? And it was only once I'd experienced race and a tiny bit of CTO, because I'm not quite that brave, that I went, I get it. They're catching up with all these other manufacturers who've made their cars a lot more comfortable and accessible and easier for younger, richer people who are buying them as a lifestyle asset rather than as a race car. You know, so you're not wrong, but you just didn't get a chance to experience the other side of the coin.
That's it.
Yeah, so sorry to interrupt, but
I had another car. I had a car for a week last week. I had an Alpine A110.
Ooh, nice.
It was in a lovely dark blue with a sort of brown interior.
Oh, right up your street.
It was exactly. I was like, oh, this looks good. Did they plan this?
Yeah, exactly.
Apparently not. But that was an interesting car. I had real mixed emotions about it. I'd heard all this hype. I'm not about to say there's nothing good about it. I just heard a lot of hype about how it goes down a road, how the suspension's amazing, all of these things. And my first experience of it is in town, and just driving around town, I didn't think, I was like, it's kind of like a sports car. It's a bit jiggly. Like, it's not amazingly well damped or anything in town. It just,
small,
it's kind of a sports car.
Yeah.
So it sort of par for the course, nothing exceptional at this speed, at this situation. And then drove it around a bit. I think they look amazing. I think the pricing is brilliant for what you get. The interior is kind of cool. You accept that there's certain things that they have to do, like the screen and whatever, and there's some things that annoyed me. But those sorts of parts, the car costs 50 grand. Like you can't compare it to a 100 grand car. But then driving it on a good road was great. Like it's handles amazingly. The lightness. Okay, I'm used to driving light stuff, but you can tell straight away that it weighs a lot less, which is an amazing feeling and a completely different sensation, and it turns in nicely and whatever. But I don't drive a car on a country road flat out.
No, you'd be a lunatic.
I don't push to the, maybe like once a blue moon, but generally I drive moderately quickly, but like
well within your abilities.
Yeah, well within my abilities and the grip of the car. I'm not pushing the front end and the rear end all the time because like, you know, things go wrong or whatever, and you might go around the corner and there's a truck there. And it's just not how I drive a car. And driving that car at that speed was interesting, but I would have loved it to have a manual gearbox.
Yeah, it's weird, that car. I was super lucky and got invited to like the proper press drive way back in the day, and remember really enjoying it because it felt, as you say, kind of special for the price point. You know, yeah, look mega. You get in it, it feels cool, it feels different. It doesn't feel like a Renault parts bin. So I was like, this is great. And it sounded kind of meaty. I don't know what the newer ones, if they've been dialed down with.
If you have it in the sport mode, I'd say it sounds pretty good.
Okay.
Driving around normally, it sounds like a 4-cylinder.
Fine. And yeah, and we got put on some proper roads. I was like, this is nuts, and the weight balance and everything. But since then, I've never really wanted to get in it again. It's not a car that I'm like, God, I'd love to, like 599 GTO. I mean, I would rip someone's arm off to have another go in one of those. So yeah. And then of course it got all this kind of like plaudits, like every single journalist in the world was saying, but you don't exactly see many of them on the road. I mean, there's very few negative reviews of Alpine A110s out there, but they don't seem to sell a ton of them.
And I wonder why that is.
Because if you look at the GR Yaris, it's had the same kind of reception and is selling by the bucket loads theoretically. I mean,
is that a price situation?
I think maybe that's exactly it. I think because Alpine didn't have a lot of history, like people weren't that familiar with the brand, people didn't really understand what it was, and then it came along at 50 grand, people were like, why would I buy that and not a Cayman or an F-Type or whatever it might be? Whilst with a Yaris, like that's super affordable, especially on finance to so many people when it's a Toyota and they probably had a Yaris before or whatever it might be. So it seems more accessible. But yeah, I'm always surprised there aren't more of them. But then again, as I say, I've never dreamt of jumping back in one, and I drove the Litchfield A110, which was nuts quick as you can imagine, and enjoyed it. But I still wasn't like, oh yeah, like God, I want one of these now. It's just like, oh yeah, this was cool. Like
I think it was a real difficult one for me because I like the car. I think it's cool. I think it's really cool. I think for 50 grand, it's really cool. My problem is I get to drive some unbelievable things.
Yeah, we're spoiled, mate. We're so spoiled.
Absolutely spoiled. And therefore, I just can't get in a car that's got a average sounding 4-cylinder with paddles and compare that to being able to, you drive a 250 short wheelbase, V12 manual. Like
it ruins everything.
It absolutely ruins everything. I think it's a really cool car. I think if you're in the market for that sort of price bracket level of car, I think it holds its value well. It's different. It's very light, which is a very different experience. So you should definitely drive one. But if you pitched it against something like my GT3 RS, I'd say it's just completely different. It's just a completely different.
But I think I'd have an Exige or an Evora or an Elise, or I'd have a Cayman, or, as good as it is, it wasn't good enough to make me want it more than its competition. It's
more refined. I'd say it's more refined than one of the Lotuses.
100%.
But that's depending what you're looking for.
I think
the luggage is a bit of an issue. There's not very much luggage space.
Hardly any. But that's what I like about Lotus is this almost that, you're kind of signing up for the impracticality or however you might phrase it.
You've agreed.
You've agreed. So, why not? And that's the thing with the Alpine, like it had elements of all these different cars, and you're right, it's different, it's unique, but it just, for some reason, wasn't enough for me to ever go, I'm desperate to have a go in one of those again, or I would definitely buy one of those if I was ever in the market. Interesting that was your kind of thought as well. And I think you're right. I think a manual gearbox would have helped a lot, but it's not maybe the only thing that would have made it more desirable. And we can't be that wrong because not many people are buying them. As good as everyone says they are, there just aren't that many on the road. So
I think the practicality side of it in that car, there's not a lot of luggage space at all.
Nope.
And it's just the nature of it's a very small car and the layout and everything. But you can't really do a road trip in that car. You can. You can do a road trip in any car.
You can, but
you don't have loads of luggage space.
And you can't put food back there because it gets hot next to the engine, and all these different elements. It's a tough car to live with, but maybe a fun car to drive on a Sunday morning. So
I did think when I found a good bit of road, and with all the situations, you can't drive very far away from home really. And I did think this is all I don't need much more power at this weight of a car this weight. This is actually pretty damn good for a road, like a British road, this amount, 250 horsepower, 1100 kilos. I'd maybe go like 300 and a little bit more torque or something, and maybe with a diff. But in that car, it works really nicely without a diff.
I'm all for the 250, 300 horsepower hot hatch super minis, whatever you want to call them these days, or the 400, 500 horsepower super sports car. That for me, that's like over 500 horsepower these days, I'm a bit like, I just don't need it. You know what I mean? I drove a 550 Barchetta the other day.
And how's that?
Mate, I mean, what a thing. I mean, in so many ways, not what you're expecting or even wanting, but also brilliant. So I don't know if you've driven 550 or 575
no.
from Ferrari. So obviously these days, F12, 812, 509, manic V12 Ferrari engines, rev their tits off, scream, want to kill you. The V12 in a 550 or 575, so lethargic in a really nice way. It's a grand tourer. It's elegant. The power kind of sweeps you along the road. Hey, it will still step out on you and it will still spit you into a hedge if it wants to, but it's very elegant. It's just grandiose. And then top that into what I've always thought as Ferrari's ultimate car, a roofless front engine V12. Like that's for me the pinnacle of Ferrari. And its styling just, I think, has aged so well. I drove it on a beautiful sunny day and it's wobbly as heck, but it just somehow works. It felt more like a 60s car than a noughties car. And it's a car that you would absolutely drive from Monaco to Rome, having the time of your life. But it's so night and day from a modern day V12 Ferrari. And, as I say, so that was, I'm forgetting the numbers, but 500 horsepower or 550, something like,
something like that. 550 maybe?
Yeah, I think just under 540.
Just the naming.
Literally. I mean, that's why I was like 555. I mean, already more than I would need, but also enough. Do you know what I mean? Like manual gearbox. So,
and it's quite a heavy car, so it's
exactly that, and it's flimsy. So you've got to watch out for the bumps. But I was like, this is it, and this is a supercar for me. And that's all I would ever want and need. And then you get into an 812 Superfast or the modern day equivalent, the 812 GTS, the car that I really loathe. I mean, you must not ever be able to.
Why do you not like it?
I'm sure it's brilliant, and this is I'm giving away my entire main channel video now, so you're getting the exclusive.
Well, this is coming out in a couple of weeks. So
okay, great.
Right.
For me, the 812 GTS is Ferrari giving a middle finger to their history and their heritage. As I say, in my mind, the ultimate Ferrari is that roofless V12 Grand Tour, that front engine. And so if you look at it, 550 Barchetta, 575 Super America, 599 SA Aperta, F60, super limited numbers for the pinnacle, the hierarchy. This is Ferrari. And then they went, well, for the 812, let's just make it a production car. Let's just make it, anyone can go.
An amazing decision.
No, see, I disagree because fine, fair enough. Everyone is going to be going, why are you cross about that? It's made the ultimate version of a Ferrari more accessible.
Exactly.
But Ferrari and all of these brands now, all it's all going to be about is heritage. That's all these brands have got left, because every single car fundamentally feels the same, does the same thing. They've got the same power. They all do 0-6 in the same way. They're all as dull as each other. And as we go hybrid and electrified, all you're buying is badge, history, heritage. And Ferraris is all the way back in the 60s, the glory days of these iconic grand touring special cars, these Pininfarina body cars. And of course, there is the Schumacher eras as well. And across the history. And by making 812 GTS accessible, they've no longer got these cars for people to celebrate and to enjoy. It's just a car that anyone can go and buy. And so
you say that if you spend the 400 grand it's going to cost.
Yes, sorry, any very rich Ferrari customer can go buy. And I'm sure you would have had to bought 18 Lusos and 15 Portofinos first. But it essentially, now that it's not a limited, special number, it's not got that sort of the 550 Barchetta is not the best Ferrari they've ever made. But because of so many elements, it feels inherently special. And whilst I'm sure the 812 GTS is an incredible car, and if I drove one, I guarantee I would love it, it would never feel as special, because if I drove it to Monaco, I'd probably see 6 others drive past me.
I get your point.
So that's what I'm saying. Is it doesn't make the car any worse.
It should be limited.
It should be limited. It's these brands have got to somehow keep something about them that's special. And your F8 experience is Ferrari modernizing themselves. I applaud that. Great, brilliant. I want my favorite brand to be with the times and be competitive. But it's also showing how they're cheapening their product. And, all of this stuff. Look at McLaren. Unfortunately, as much as I want McLaren to be a success story, a lot of their downfall has come by making too many cars. Yeah. Too many versions. Nothing feels special. Every single week something better comes out. You think you've bought the best edition, a special edition comes out, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And it cheapens the brand. And that's what I think Ferrari may have done with the GTS. But let's wait and see, because I'm sure I'll drive it.
The thing is,
and say, I regret everything I said.
All of these things. I had a ride in a DBS Superleggera Volante. I don't know when this was. It was warm, so it must have been summertime.
Sure.
And we drove past HRO in South Kensington, and they'd just got their GTS demonstrator, and we parked them next to each other, and you look at the one to the other, and in all categories, other than like Aston Martin is a bit more understated and kind of a cooler brand for an old person, the Ferrari was so much nicer. Like interior, exterior, boot size, massive, like engine better. All of these things, and you look at that car and go, this is the ultimate V12 car.
Agreed.
I would love to own one of these at a point in time. And because they're making a bazillion of them, you know what? That's actually possible.
Fair. And so, as I say, I think that will be the argument when my video goes out that a lot of people are going to make, of being like, this is a good thing, not a bad thing. But I just worry in 10 or 15 years' time, when the world is a very different place, are Ferrari going to have that strength to pull that sort of brand? Because are the cars going to feel so special, or are they actually not? Are they going to seem too accessible? I don't know. I think
in 10 years' time, we'll be in a really interesting situation, because these will all be modern classics because they're not electric.
Good point.
Actually, in 10 years, they could still be a hybrid, but that's just heavier. Like, you don't need a car that can produce 700 and whatever horsepower, nearly 800 horsepower from a naturally aspirated V12. As long as you're keeping the V12, unless you're making it really small, you don't need hybrid.
No. I mean, look at SF90. I mean, who needs that? I mean, I want one so badly, but who,
What do you feel about that car?
It's such a weird car, because I feel like Ferrari just really messed up their own marketing campaign for that car. I've almost written an email to Maranello being like, stop speccing launch cars with black roofs and silver wheels. They look shite. When that car came out, I was like, oh God, whatever. And then the Charles Leclerc Monaco video was a disaster.
Oh, that was awful.
It sounded bad, and they weren't doing anything exciting with it. And the initial reviews came out, and it was like, oh, it's too much power and blah, blah, blah. And now
I almost think they shouldn't have done reviews.
I kind of agree with you there. It's a bit like what's the McLaren, the Speedtail, and the Koenigsegg and the McLaren Speedtail. Cars that why are you doing? I mean, But there you go, because actually they need to sell a ton of SF90s. It's not a LaFerrari. They need to sell a ton of them. They haven't already sold out. They're going to build as many as they possibly can.
Yeah, they'll build as many as people buy.
Literally
And I think the answer is, well, I don't know, because it's just, I'm not buying one. I look at that car and go, absolutely no way. That is the least interesting thing I can think of on the planet. Like an F8, I already thought wasn't interesting. This is having driven it in sport or whatever.
Yeah.
I imagine if you turn everything off, it's more than interesting. Adding another 200 kilos and front wheel drive, that does not an interesting car make.
It's not exciting. But I'm just intrigued by it because firstly, I think we must have all seen the Powerslide Lover clips. And he makes any car look exciting.
He's done the same in like a Wraith.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I'm not saying that it makes the SF90 good, but it does make it look attractive. Yeah. And there's some stunning specs coming out. So I'm starting to see cars that I like the look of. I think visually it's a lot more impressive than the launch car. And I'm just like, as I say, I want to embrace this new era of this brand that I love. And that car is a very kind of different car for Ferrari. It's a lot of new different things that, we wouldn't necessarily consider for them. And it's maybe the way they're going to be going with hybrid technologies and the electrification of so many of their cars. So, as a first, it's a bit like the Taycan. I can find it's not as dramatic as a Taycan, but what excites me about the Taycan is whilst it's got a few foibles, it excites me because if that's what Porsche are doing as their first attempt as a full EV car, like, wow, what's the future going to be for Porsche? It excites me. So that's kind of why I want to experience the SF90. Is it going to be like, oh, well, this was just a pointless car, or this is an exciting stepping stone or starting point?
It's a car I massively appreciate technologically what they've done, and the way the market has evolved from whenever the P1 and all that came out. I can't even remember when that was.
2014? No, 2014.
Yeah. 6 years ago or something.
I think 2014.
Where these cars were $1 million plus for a car with 1,000 horsepower. And a hybrid powertrain. Now 400 and something. I don't know what the price is. I imagine a lot of them are about 500, but that sort of price for a car that's got 1,000 horsepower. So trick. The tech is, I believe, unbelievable. The way it manages everything, all of these sorts of things. So as like a technological tour de force, I'm really glad they've made it. I think people will buy it. It just personally doesn't interest me because I drive cars on the road. And I don't drive them on the road like Powerslide Lover as much as I would like to. But I live in the UK, and you definitely can't get away with that sort of.
And I just don't have that skill. I would literally be upside down in a ditch in a second. But yeah, I mean, you're right, and I think maybe that's what the initial reviews were hinting towards. And this is my big complaint at the moment. A lot of my audience over on my YouTube channel sometimes ask the question: is what do we mean when we say that at the moment cars are too fast or too powerful? Because I'm really worried I'm becoming an old man. I mean, I am becoming an old man. But, my dream car right now is a Bentley Continental GT.
Which one? V8?
No, full W12. Give it
full fat. Okay.
Full fat. Brown leather. I know the V8's lighter and better on its feet and sometimes sounds a bit better, but I'm just thinking if you go in Bentley, just get the full waft mode. And so, I immediately recognize that I'm an old man because of that. But I don't want to be that voice that's like, oh, it was so much better in the noughties. And I have to be aware of that because if you were 13 or 14 right now, is the SF90 not your LaFerrari? Is that not the car that you're thinking is the best thing in the world? And I don't want to sit here being like, oh, it's so pointless. So I think it's more about the fact of, and when I filmed the Barchetta, it was over at Gerardo & Co. And Max Gerardo said it perfectly. These modern cars, you never can drive them fast enough to extract the same kind of emotion, feeling, and involvement that you can at a car with less power. Because, in a 500 horsepower manual car, 500 horsepower PDK GT3, you can really mash it and get the car kind of moving around and dancing and making you excited, making you feel involved, like you're in control of it, at certain occasions, on certain occasions.
Yeah.
But if you're on a 1,000 horsepower SF90, you just, unless you're Powerslide Lover, you are so rarely extracting anything from that car. Everything it's doing, 99% of the time, it could do in its sleep. And therefore, are you going to get any kind of feeling, emotion, connection from the car? Probably not. And that's where I think the problem lies. These cars are so good now, so capable, so fast, and so brilliant that actually we can't experience it. They're too good for humans.
Yeah. And I found, I definitely feel like I'm slipping into that old man phase of saying things were, but I don't actually think necessarily things were better in the past, because I think if we could build a car to the ethos that I want to now, the problem is regulations and safety. But I do like regulations and safety, because if you crash, this is a good thing. But I would love a 500 horsepower, 1,000 kilo car. I reckon maybe 400, but I'll just say 500, because I would like to be able to have stupid amounts of on tap gas if you want. But that sort of level of car is still too fast for the road. Like, okay, you say too fast for the road. What is too fast for the road? But genuinely, like, you can't put your foot down for very long in any modern car before you're going unbelievably fast. And our roads, unless it's a motorway or something, your vision, you can't see that far. So adding more grip and wider tires, it's when I look at my older 911, my backdate, the way that's set up is quite grippy-ish. And the way it's sort of designed, it's a bit wider than it was before, and it's got grippy tires. And actually, I had a passenger lap in a 2-litre cup car, Porsche, like 1965 race car.
Wow. And
that was someone that was like pretty good.
Yeah, on it.
I got out of that thinking, I think the older car in my life needs to be more like this than actually what I've got. Great car, love it. But just the experience of having skinnier tires and a much wider band of grip sort of deterioration, like that 911 I've got, if you get to the limit, it's very snappy, like really quite snappy. Where the older things, they're much less so. And you can get them out of shape at much lower speeds. And that just sounds really appealing. And unfortunately, I have some friends that like really old cars, like cars without seatbelts and cars with the pedals in the wrong place, like throttle in the middle and stuff like that. Yeah. And I'm starting to appreciate why they like these things, because they're literally, you're like drifting at like 20 miles an hour.
And they make you think. You
think.
You're not driving them in sort of robot mode, which unfortunately a lot of the modern cars you are. You've got to kind of really drive. You've got to pay attention and do things. And what you do changes the car and makes the car behave in a certain way. Whereas you get into most modern supercars, you mash the throttle, the electronics kind of take care of it for you, and you don't even realize what you've just nearly done. And so, yeah, I think we have to be careful. I think we have to, live in the times and realize where technology is taking us and what the benefits of some of these cars are. And as I say, that was my eye-opening moment with the F8 was like, I get it, because nowadays, if you just made 2 billion on Bitcoin and you went, screw it, I want to go buy a Ferrari, and your previous car was a Golf GTI, you don't want to step into an F12 TDF, because you will die. And an F8 gives you all of that Ferrari presence when you turn up to the club, gives you all that excitement. Once you get there, you can put it into CT off and have a good time. But in sport, it's totally manageable and easy. It's easy to drive. It's comfortable. Blah. And so I get it. I applaud that. It's just not the car that I want. And I think if I won the Euro Millions, I would go and buy a ton of cars. Not many of them would have been made in the last 2 years.
No. There's one car. If I won the Euro Millions, which actually would run out quite quickly if I really started digging into cars.
I do think about this quite a lot.
I would have a Koenigsegg Jesko.
Would you?
As one of those, like, if I had 20 cars.
That surprises me so much, given everything we just said.
Because that is like the ultimate of modern nuttiness to me.
Yes.
Do you get it from a tech point? Like from a tech and engineering, I love the company. I love what they're doing. I love the fact that they've literally put 1,500 horsepower in something that weighs 1,300 kilos or something. And I reckon to fill that box, to tick that box of this is unbelievably fast and bonkers, Koenigsegg Jesko.
See, I don't know, but do those cars work?
Yes.
Okay. I would
even if they didn't, they work enough. I think they work pretty well now.
I would go Bugatti Chiron. I mean, one of the variants, I don't even know what they make. Is a pure sport? Or,
no way.
That's a bit more me. I mean, I get it.
I haven't driven one.
Oh, man.
I haven't driven either.
Yeah. But I think you're right. I mean, there's something for the all-out bonkers hypercar in the lineup, because, as you say, it's kind of embracing, but at the same time, we're then contradicting ourselves, because at one point we're slagging off supercars for having too much power and being too anodized, and then we're saying we actually want a 1,500 horsepower, £3 million hypercar. So
all I'm saying is, if you gave me like 150 million, I would have a Jesco. Okay. If you gave me 10 million, I would not buy one.
Fair. Okay. I
would way rather one sports car in my garage, a comfortable daily, and a sports car that's like 1,000 kilos, 500 horsepower, manual gearbox, revs to 9.
Okay, I'm with you. I just got a little bit distracted because I'm looking out my window and I can see the building opposite. Someone's literally just kicked a hole through the wall. Like, I started to see these bricks falling. I was like, what? And then there's like, it's like at the building. So I just kicked up. I'm like, what has happened over there?
They're coming for you.
Oh, there's more. They're doing more. They must be doing some piping or something like that. But it looks like someone's just kicking it with their foot.
Is there a time limit on your office before it gets flattened?
So I don't know what I'm allowed to say here, but let me just say that
it's not going to be around in 20 years.
No, so almost all of Brentford has been bought up by the Ballymore Group. Yeah. I guess they're the group. They're big developers in London. Right. Look at any big building site; it's usually got Ballymore written on it, and they are redeveloping this whole area. So at some point, these buildings will be demolished. We have certain guarantees, of course, as you can imagine. We've all got rolling notice periods, and hence why I'm not doing a James refit of this building, and because at some point, so you got to be wary of that. But at the same time, I'm not moving out next month. So, this for me was a very expensive test. I had that first studio, was good for the podcast. This is kind of what I thought or what I wanted to try and do. If this goes well, whenever I get forced to move, whether that's 6 months, a year, 18 months, 2 years, whatever it might be, it's like, well, was that worth it? Do I want to go and do that again? Or actually was it a bit of a fail? And I kind of, it's an expensive trial, but I was prepared to take that risk. I'm sorry, this is so distracting what they're doing like outside my window. Imagine looking at a building and these holes just being punched. I'm like, what is going on? Anyway, so I'll try not to be distracted.
They're knocking it down.
They're not. They're like, they must be putting a pipe in or something like that. But maybe. It's a bizarre thing to look at a building and see
bit of heating.
Just bricks being pushed outwards. Anyway, yeah, go on. Sorry.
Right. So have you had some standout drives in the last year? You got like a top 3 or something? So the one that really surprised me last year, Murcielago SV. But did we speak about that? Because that might have been just before I came on to do the podcast with you. Not the biggest Lambo fan in the world. Paddles? Are they all paddles?
Paddles, yeah. They're a handful of manuals, but very, very, very rare. It was just everything we've just talked about. It was ludicrous, manic, loud, impractical, stupid, but brilliant, and a ballistic missile. So that I enjoyed a lot. 911 Speedster, the latest generation, kind of was this is the probably ultimate Porsche for me. I think that was my Euro Millions car. Really, really enjoyed that.
And do you think on that car, having the roof off adds a lot, I believe. I've not driven it, but I can imagine.
Yeah.
And do you think it's raw enough to fill your needs for feel and stuff like that?
It's a Porsche, so it's never going to be as visceral as Lambos, Ferraris, some McLarens, stuff like that. It is still a Porsche, so it's a very different driving experience. But I've lusted after a touring since I bought my Carrera T in 2018. So I really love that car, and the Speedster was enough for me to think I would actually remove the roof. I wouldn't even have I would permanently have the roof off. I would put the interior in some kind of weatherproof leather or some kind of material, and no matter what the weather or occasion, drive it aggressively with no roof. And I think that's the way to do it with that car. It's just no frills. It's just a very authentic driving experience. Manual gearbox, wind in your hair. I think it looks the bomb. It does sound good. Great engine. Does everything you need on the road without being stupid. So that's what I mean. It was just the perfect Porsche for me in so many ways. So yeah, I saw it as an eye-opening, this is kind of it for road driving experience. Of course, if I want to be loud and shouty and showy, I'm going to take my 360 or the LaFerrari Aperta I end up buying. But you know, but as a car just to drive very regularly, it would be a Speedster, as I say, with the roof taken out, and just, you know, they'd be like, who is that plonker in the pouring rain driving a Speedster? But that would be me. So that was good. There will be other things that my audience will be yelling at me saying, how can you have forgotten that you did X, Y, and Z? But
have you driven a GR Yaris yet?
Yes, drove the GR Yaris. Very, very cool. I really liked it. And if you watch the video I put out, you can see the initial overexcitement because it was brilliant. But heart on hearts, I wanted it to be a little bit more. Thank you. There you go. I'll write that one down. I did warn you. I wanted it to be a bit more stripped out. I wanted it to be a bit more Abarth Piposto, Mini GP3, which isn't even that stripped out. But I wanted roll cage in the back. I wanted a bit tinny, which is me being silly because I just like raw, stupid cars. And in my head, I heard a homologation special and I went, oh my God, it's going to have like holes in the floor. It's still a very nice place to be. It's just a fantastic hot hatch. And I put it, in my mind, it felt very similar to the Megane Trophy R, which is a much bigger car. But in terms of road presence and road feel, it felt similar. I don't think many of the people agree with that, but that's how it felt to me. And yeah, really, really liked it. But for me to have went out and bought one, I would have wanted it a little bit more, feeling more motorsport on the road. And that's super personal. But you haven't driven one yet, or you have?
No, I've it's going to happen. It's just not yet. It's
brilliant. I'm actually going to look on my Instagram what else I actually have driven.
Because that's another one of those things. Like I remember someone was giving me some abuse, mild abuse on Instagram when I
sounds normal.
I posted a picture of it or something when it had come out, or was commenting on something else, and someone was like, "Oh, Sam, why don't you buy one?" And I was like, "Well, like I don't really have a need for this car, and I don't know, cars are not necessarily about need, but like I literally have no need for that. So it would be like a fun purchase. And if it's a fun purchase, I probably wouldn't buy it new because I reckon so many people are going to buy them and they're all the same.
Yep.
So I would just wait like a year, see how it is, drive one. I wouldn't just order one without driving one, and then maybe buy one after a year." And they're like, "Oh, you should like live a little." It's like, well, it's not. It's still 30 grand.
Yeah, it's not a free car,
and it's not like, I'm sorry, but it's not going to be a better driving experience than my F40.
No, I don't think it is. As brilliant as it might be.
I know it's not meant to be the same and blah 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 blah. But like, that was just. It's just. Yeah. I think people go a bit mad. They're like, "Yeah, but you could possibly afford it, so why don't you just do it?" And you're like, "Yeah, but I think about buying all sorts of crap daily. Doesn't mean
I was going to do it.
Doesn't mean this is going to be the top of the list."
But that's definitely a YouTube. Like we asked for that as a YouTube generation. I wouldn't lump you in with this awful scene, but you know, the likes of myself, Supercars of London, Shmi 150, JWW. You know, when we were, and we still are, I think, maybe not me, but you know, the buying and selling, especially at the levels that James and Tim and TG and stuff operate. People just assume that we can buy whatever we want whenever we want. And so, you know, the amount of times I get sent Project 8s, Project 7s, Challenge for Darlings, whatever, just buy it. And I'm like, are you mad? And unfortunately, Tim, with all of his success, has made the rest of us, you know, subject to that kind of expectation or abuse from the audience. And yeah, if you're seeing with an F40, people are like, well, why the hell aren't you buying 10 other cars every month? You know, so it's a hard thing to...
The answer is, I got no money left.
I got no cash. You know, but then also, again, we blame ourselves because we often say that as YouTubers, oh, I'd love to do that, but I can't afford it. And then 2 months later, there we are in 3 other cars. So, you know...
It's perfectly rational for someone to call you out and go, okay, you should buy that. And then you go, oh, I don't want to, or I can't afford it. And they go, but you do this. And you're like, that's a fair comment. Yeah. It's a fair comment. But it's not how it works. But that's a fair comment.
It's a lot of man maths. And yeah, I think as petrol heads, you endlessly think of things to buy, don't you? You endlessly spec cars up, look on Auto Trader. Like, that's what we're all thinking about.
Yeah, I'm so back and forth. And I don't actually necessarily want to put the audience through what I'm thinking at the moment, because it's one of those things that it might happen, might not happen. And you just, if it doesn't happen, like there's literally no point in talking about it. So
it's almost a whole nother episode in itself.
Keep hush.
Keep hush. But for me, like right now, I say like, I'm loving the sub 50K market. That's what I'm all about, the sub 50K market. The thought of spending 150 grand on a car right now, whilst you could get some amazing cars, because that price bracket, it's terrifying how much amazing stuff you can get. I want to buy a flat. Do you know what I mean? Like maybe that's the old man in me again. Like I'm like, I couldn't fathom spending that kind of money at the moment on a car. And bravo to the guys in my space who are doing it regularly, whether they're doing it for content or on a personal level, because it's amazing. And I would love to be going out and buying Huracan Evos and whatever it might be, but I can't fathom it.
But it's got to stack up. Like Tim wouldn't buy something if it didn't financially make sense.
Oh, I mean, Tim is a machine. I mean, not only did it financially make sense, but he's there for content. He's been doing this for years and years. He knows what he's doing. And as I say, I applaud it's not even jealousy. Like I just applaud him. Like I would probably do exactly the same if I could, do it, but I don't have I don't have the guts and I don't have the financial resources. I've got 500,000 subscribers. He's got fucking 50 million. I don't even know how many he's got these days. So it's a different ball game. And that's why you can't ever judge, but the audience lumps us in the same group. The audience says, well, you do the same thing. You make the same content. Why can't you go and do X, Y, and Z?
And I think, unfortunately, living in this world and operating in this world, and yes, I have a decent amount of resources to buy very expensive cars, but I hang out with people that are infinitely more wealthy than myself.
Depressing.
Like I didn't hang out like day to day all the time, but like I have friends and people I know that have got a lot more money, and you come across people that have got a lot more money, and people are buying stuff left, right, and center, and it's. We've talked about this before, this sort of pressure we live in this world of supercars and hypercars. So you're like, oh yeah, okay, maybe I should buy a blah, 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 blah. And you go, well, actually, is that sensible? Or should you have 7 cars or whatever, all of those things. And then every now and then I try and check myself, ideally before buying something. And I haven't bought anything in a while, so I've managed to successfully do this and go, okay, but like, you really want to buy this car. This car costs X amount of money and you might finance it or whatever, but either way, you're committing to spending this amount of money, however you get there in the end. If I gave you this amount of money, what would you do with it?
Yeah, what else
and the answer is often not buy a car. Or I'd go like, actually, there's this really cool project car I would love to do. Like something, I don't know. The one I looked at them recently was like, I kind of like an E30 M3 that's like sorted and a bit lols.
Nice. Yeah,
and you look at that and go, well, that would be significantly less than 150 grand. And you'd have all of the fun of doing the stuff or whatever. And you just look at all of these other cars and you go, oh yeah, rather than buying this new modern super expensive thing, which I would love, there is so much other fun stuff. Even just like, I could go on holiday. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's exactly it. But I think you have to go through that experience,
totally.
You have to go a bit crazy and a bit mad to then go, actually, maybe it's not worth it. Because as I say, when I was working a desk job, 9 to 5, I dreamt of being able to go and buy supercars. And I thought if I had any money, that's all I'm going to do. That's all I do is spend money on cars. And, it's 5 years later, having bought and sold a few, that I'm like, well, actually, I'm spoiled. I get to drive stuff. If I want to do a road trip in a Cayman GT4, I could probably beg and plead Porsche UK to lend me one. At which point I then save myself 100 grand. So yeah, it's a spoil and a different world we live in. And I think if I wasn't doing YouTube and I was making money elsewhere, I probably would still be, spending every single bit of money on a bigger car. But nowadays I get my thrills from things that don't keep me awake at night financially, because that has been a horrible,
it's very helpful.
Horrible situation. Thinking how on earth am I going to make that payment for my car next month?
And also just like doing things. I actually nowadays, and I probably should just sell everything, start from zero and go back up again, and use the money for something fun or whatever, and then doing fun things with the things you own.
Yeah.
Like you did a round the world trip. You could take, like, let's say for the price of whatever, an F8, you could buy a 50 grand car and travel for years.
That's exactly like, there's a part of me which is, you know, as and when COVID is long behind, this is so far away now because of COVID, but you know, buying a Defender, or I'm trying to think of something else which is cool in that kind of bracket, and really kitting it out and driving the Americas, you know, the very, very north of Alaska to the very, very south of South America, in Patagonia or whatever. So, you know, I'm like, that would be it. And the kind of budgets that I look at for that, are the same price as looking at going and specking up a Roma. Because that was that's an experience you asked about driving. I really, really loved that Roma. And, you know, spec one up, it's 200 grand straight away. And I just am thinking, 200 grand, firstly, that's my studio apartment in Monaco. Well, not Monaco, but the south of France. Or that's my adventure. That's my next adventure. Why am I going to do that on one car that at the moment I can't even drive anywhere or do anything with? So, it's hard to justify. But 3 years ago, I was justifying it very easily. So
totally.
Yeah, it's weird how times change and mentalities change.
And it's not, and I think more as I realized that the performance has got to a point where it's sort of nutty, and we've got past the more is better. It's not necessarily more is worse, but more might be very similar.
Yeah.
Like 800 horsepower versus 700 horsepower in a rear-wheel drive car. Moot point there.
Sure. Both are going to kill you. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah. One just a little bit faster.
There we go.
But there's so many cool, interesting cars at all price brackets. Yeah. Like I'm very limited by space and stuff like that, but I would love an E46 M3 for a bit. I think they're just cool.
Fair.
And I kind of want to have one.
Yeah. No, I want a C43 AMG wagon, the original boxy one. I don't know why. I just want it. Like, you know, hey, I mean, it's going to be awful. It's not going to work, but I just want it. Go on.
I always see whenever I'm at Merlin's, he's always in something stupid.
Oh, mate.
And he just drives it a little bit, whether it was his Cosworth Mercedes. I can't remember the name of it. That was very cool. It's
dangerous being here because my window looks out onto his parking lot. And he's got a Clio Williams in at the moment. Yeah. He's got a Gen 1 CLK 55 with the 5.4 V8. He's got help me out here, the M5 wagon, the second generation, E30.
Don't know. I don't know my numbers for most of these cars.
Anyway, 38? So 38.
That's old. Old is 30. It's quite...
Before 46. 38. Yeah, it must be 38. E30. No. Oh, anyway. He's got a lovely old M5 wagon. And there's been all these bits, and I look at them, and the thing with his cars is they're all kind of 20, 30K-ish or less. Yeah. And I'm like, oh my God. Like, I want that. I don't know why, but I just do. And that's the stuff which really excites me at the moment. You know, old Alpine wagons and quirky little bits and bobs. And you know, I get far more excited about those cars, those journeys. And that's definitely, you know, our age coming through, because if you look at the cars that trade for huge amounts of money, people in their 70s who've made a ton of money and can go buy the cars from their childhood. Yeah. And, you know, fingers crossed, we get to 60 years old and we've made a chunk of cash, we are going to be going and buying LaFerraris and 918s and P1s just because we are. That's, you know, that's the cars that right now, or maybe 5 years ago, we were going crazy about. And so if we've suddenly got the money to do so, you're going to go, yeah, heck, why not do it? And so for now, I'm lusting after the cars that I grew up with, that, you know, when I was...
and I think you always will.
Yeah, you always will. That's exactly it. So that's what I meant about earlier, saying I don't want to slag off new cars too much, because I'm sure there's a 12 or 13-year-old boy or girl watching my content lusting after an F8. And if I go, oh, 100%. It's just too much power, they're going to go, well, you're out of touch, mate. Bugger off.
Wait, and we are on that level, we are.
Yeah, agreed. They're
not our supercars anymore, unfortunately. I think the cars that are the supercars when you're in that formative period of like, whatever it's 10 to 20 or something like that, like they stick, they really stick. And if you said, if I built like a 30 car garage or something, even like a 20 car garage, the cars that would go in it are the sort of 2000, they would start in, I'd start in the sort of 2010 era and be like, okay, my GT3 RS, I would have a Speciale. Like there's loads of cars from that 20, 30 year period before I would go any older.
Yeah. My sweet spot is 95 to 2010. Okay. That 15 years, there are hundreds of cars that I'd buy in that window. I mean, hundreds. So yeah, it's just, you know, as you say, it's sort of, we're just old.
And it's very easy to get drawn into the sort of top trumps element of it. Like the more I know about cars, the more I realize that certain cars are more special, if for whatever, whether they're rare or whatever, than others on paper. And, you know, a certain car might have amazing history and that's why it's expensive and whatever. And I can see why people with all of the money, like Bill Maher or something, that collection is literally just the most significant cars in the world ever. And I've got the 20, like, oh, I got a Cobra. I haven't just got a Cobra. I got the first
Cobra. Like, yeah.
That sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And I see how if you've got all of the money and probably not tons of time, that's how you end up there.
Yeah.
But there's no like all of these cars, whether it's, like all of this old stuff is still cool.
So cool and so good. I mean, that's the other thing which we have to remember, like, you know, especially looking at that era, which was our era, some of the stuff that came out really is brilliant bits of kit. I mean, you know, GT3 RS 4 litre as an example, 599 GTOs, you know, things like that. Really, and I say Murcielago SV, they're properly special bits of kit. And okay, fine, they are let down in certain areas. Maybe they're not as technologically advanced. The gearboxes are the main thing that unfortunately dates most of these cars, but they are also amazing and they offer so much, and therefore they should be celebrated. Whereas if you're buying a car from the 60s, it's a very different story and you're having a very different experience. But if you turned up to most mountain drives in a 599 GTO, you're going to be having as good a time as someone in an 812.
Oh, for sure.
And that's the whole thing. And
I definitely do appreciate a lot older stuff now a lot more, and the experience of driving an older car. But there is part of me that loves certain elements of modern cars. So I was having this debate with a couple of friends yesterday of like we were looking at Alphaholic's GTA R.
Nice.
That was the topic of actually it was spawned by the fact there is a Singer on collecting cars at the moment for sale. Yeah. And one person was going, I just don't understand why you would spend that. It is a lot of money, it's a crazy amount of money. But like, why wouldn't you just buy a 2.7 RS or a 3 litre RSR or, you know, something? Okay, you probably wouldn't get one of them, but like something with some history that's like iconic, cool of its time. And let's say we were talking about Alphaholics. And you're saying, well, you could buy an original GTA, blah, 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 blah.
Monte Carlo rally official.
Rallied and won Monaco and whatever. And then you would have a piece of history that's also kind of fun to drive. And the back and forth was like, yes, I understand if you have like a 50 car collection, then maybe that's where you start ending up. But if you've got 2 cars and this is your sports car, I'm in the camp that it needs to be usable. And for me, I know other people will have different opinions. Other people are like, oh yeah, I have a 1930s Bentley or something. That's totally usable. You're like, well, for me, I quite like to be able to have some music on without having my headphones on, or maybe aircon. Like, don't need tons of stuff, and maybe some modern Olin suspension rather than this crashy stuff. That, for me, improves the driving experience.
That's exactly it. I think, you know, it's about, you want the emotion, you want the feeling, you want the sensation of being in something old, but you want the safety, the improvements, the security in your driving experience, that firstly, it's not going to constantly break down, that it can stop when it needs to, that it's the best version of itself. You know, that's always the case. You know, we always learn more as humanity, and our technology has moved forward so far that, you know, if you can have an Alpha GTA, but with so many components that just make it a better version of itself,
exactly,
then why wouldn't you? I think sometimes these Restomods can go too far and they end up being a retro shell on a modern car, at which point, you know, but if you're literally taking the same ethos and improving, you know, like the Singer is an interesting one, because I think it's now so far from actually being the original, you know, it's so far from being an original 911, if you know what I mean. It's such a different experience. It's really a modern car, but that's also got its appeal, as we've seen. You know, people like, that's more about look and feel, I would say. than necessarily harking back to an old and golden era.
It's almost too new. I know it's not new, but it's almost too new. Whereas something like
too polished.
Eagle E-Type.
Yeah, there you go.
I don't think anyone will ever drive an Eagle E-Type and go, you know what? They've gone too far here. Like, this is crap. Like, you can spec the engine. So on any of these cars, your 250 short wheelbase from GTO Engineering, you can decide which engine you have. You can have the original spec or you can have more horsepower. But other than that, with your Eagle, everything else is better. Like, everything else is just better.
Just want to
some people will say that might be worse. We're like, yeah, but is it though? Like, going down a road in a really sketchy way is not fun.
No.
Going around.
No, I mean, my first ever E-Type experience, I remember, what an iconic car to drive in. And it was at a Concours event at Windsor Castle, and I was being filmed for some like ITV show, something weird. And they literally threw me in at last minute. I had no idea. And the Jaguar mechanic comes up and goes, "He's a bit temperamental, this one, so it will backfire a lot. And if you don't go in gear, just give it loads of revs, mate. Just like tons of revs." And I was like, "Right." He goes, "You'll be fine, just loads of revs." And so off I'm going, I'm delivering my piece to camera. And I go, "Oh, and here's the Windsor Mile, let's do this." And I try and go, and I'm going slower and slower, and there's Ross Brawn in a 250 competizione behind me, and I'm like, what the hell? And I just hear like, "Loads of revs, mate." Like, and I just go, on this E-Type, it suddenly slots into gear, and I just fly down the way, this puff of smoke, being like, well, what have I just done? That was not an enjoyable experience. I absolutely pooped myself. I thought I'd broken this kind of, historic heritage E-Type, and I was stressing, and I was sweating, and I didn't fit, and all these different elements. And okay, fine, it was funny and cool and unique, but it's not something I want to do on a Sunday morning. I want to be able to get up on a Sunday morning and go out and drive and be home by 10 o'clock for my coffee, to hang out, watch my TV and do whatever. And these Restomods, if they're done correctly, give you all of that feeling, that sensation of an older car that maybe modern cars don't, but with modern reliability, security, safety, whatever it might be, which I think is a win. But there's definitely, you're right, there's this fine balance at the moment between going too far. And it also, as you say, it depends on the customer. If you've got 50 cars and tons of money, you're going to want the racing heritage, history.
And also just the mindset. It's like, everyone's different, and it still dumbfounds me every now and then that people are different to me, but apparently it is the case.
Well, that's shocking, isn't it?
Each to their own. And you look at stuff and you go like, I wouldn't have that, but they definitely wouldn't have anything else. So
there you go. That's the beauty of it.
Not one is not better than the other, but it's great that these things exist. They're just all, I think it's very easy for people, whether it's nowadays with finance and stuff like that, on anything, watches, whatever, to just go like, dum, 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 dum. Even houses. Just like, you're looking at a house and you always go and see one that's a bit more expensive, and you're like, oh, but that would be nicer. And you're like, yes, but is that deck going to be nicer for the next 30 years of your life? Like, possibly not.
Probably, definitely not.
Probably not.
I hate death.
Damn, we've taken a fair bit of time.
There we
a
go.
bunch of other questions, but you know what? Another time.
Another time, an excuse to come back. Well, hopefully, as I say, you can come and visit me here at some point. And
I will. So I normally wrap these up. You may remember last time with 5 questions.
Oh, yes.
Since you've done the 5 questions, I'll give you some questions that are the same, but some of them were sort of one time.
Okay.
5-car garage, unlimited value.
Let's
list the most expensive cars on the planet and ignore everything we've just said.
Let's totally change this around. I'm going to say it. Bugatti Chiron, 599 SA 599 GT, F12 TDF. So sorry, what I said, Bugatti Chiron, F12 TDF, 911 Speedster, Challenge Stradale, and Bentley Continental GT. I mean, that's literally not what I'd buy, but that's the answer to the question. Moving on.
All well within that timescale that we were talking about, pretty much. Yeah. Okay. How do you drive one car for the rest of your life without a £500 banger on the side?
Ferrari Enzo.
Oof. Oof. I need to drive one, but I don't like that car.
Oh, wow. I almost want to end this podcast right now. Go on.
But most undervalued car at the moment?
Oh, that's a really good question. Most undervalued Lamborghini Gallardo Superleggera Mark 1.
Ooh, what do they cost nowadays?
realistically around 80 or 90 grand.
You know what? Yeah, I get that.
Mm-hmm. So that's my shout for that car. Just a beauty. Last year I was supposed to buy that car. That was my aim for 2020. And then COVID came along and I've ended up with a 911. Lol. But yeah, it's super cool car and blows my mind that they are relatively affordable considering how limited and special they were.
Yeah, there's some cool things. What was I looking at yesterday? Gen 1 AMG GTR.
Oh, nice. Nice.
They're like 100.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
That's just a cool car.
Very cool car. Very cool car.
Right, final question. Most interesting car to you at the moment?
New car that's out at the moment?
It doesn't have to be new.
Oh.
Just like in your head.
Well, I'm going to say what I was just... Boxster Spider. 718 Boxster Spider.
Gen 1?
No,
or
718, brand new Boxster Spider. I drove one, wanted to love it, didn't really like it, and now can't stop thinking about it. So it just baffles me. I don't really know why. And there are definitely lots of other cars out there that I'm thinking about at the moment, but I was talking to somebody about that last night, so it seems appropriate to bring it up today.
Yeah, fair. I've not driven the new gen of either car, and they sounded a bit...
The engine is super unengaging. It's just a weird engine, and it really only comes to life 7 to 8,000 RPM, and it's long geared like all of those cars. So most of the time you're just a bit like, oh, come on.
But then I've heard them, and I normally fundamentally disagree with this statement, but I've heard them with an exhaust that removes bits, and they sound significantly more engaging.
But the problem is, and I know somebody who owned the GT4 718, and he did the exhaust mod, and he said it didn't solve the problem. It was a month or so of like, okay, now it sounds good, but it's still the way that the engine delivers its power. It's just a bit dirgy until you really, really get on it, at which point you're doing silly speeds in second gear. So, even though you've got a soundtrack, the gearing doesn't help, but, that's a prime example of everything you were saying earlier, and a nice way to holistically wrap up this podcast. I went into it wanting to love it, and because it didn't live up to my immediate expectations, I immediately started to hate it. Do you see what I mean? As in, my expectations were so high, the fact it didn't meet them, I was like, well, therefore it's crap. And now with time, I'm like, maybe I was a bit too harsh, but then also, maybe because it's been so long, I'm making it up in my mind. Maybe it's beer goggles now. Maybe I'm going, oh yeah, it wasn't actually that bad, but actually I got to remember that I didn't like it. So what am I doing? I don't know.
I have to really hold back sometimes. This is exactly what we're saying about the F8 and all that sort of stuff. I had a GT4. In fact, you drove my GT4.
Yep.
Drove that car, drove my GT3 RS, was like, this is a much more modern, nicer experience kind of car, like from a more modern point of view, but the engine. And then, and that's when I was like, unfortunately, I just can't like this. I can't gel with it because I've experienced the level above in terms of an engine experience. Mm-hmm. And whenever you drive one of the GT3s, the engine that's the price of the car itself.
That's exactly it. And if you drive 911 Speedster and Boxster Spider, that's the difference. That's where it stands out. And Boxster Spider, it's beautiful, I think. I owned a 718. I love the way it looks. I love lots of elements about it. It is a better car than its predecessors. But it's not a car that I lusted after more. It's not a car I wanted more. And I have to remember that. But for some reason, further down the line, I'm sitting here going, oh, maybe I was a bit too critical, and it looks really good, and what a sort of affordable car for that kind of experience. But as I say, I think it's beer goggles, but it's definitely a car that I seem to be thinking about a lot. But then again, to think about everything we said, 90 grand, think of all the other cars you get these days for 90 grand. And suddenly I'm going, well, hold on a sec, I could get about 4 other cars from 2000 that I want for that much money. So yeah, it's a weird one, but it's to answer your question, it's a calm.
And everyone is at their own place in their own journey, and one is definitely not necessarily better than the other. Mm-hmm. But like my judgment of cars is based on my experience and my usage. And I met someone recently who he was like, what do you do? I was like, involved in cars and other stuff. And he was like, oh, my friend got a Cayman GT4 recently. I was like, how was it?
Lovely. Cool. I'll talk to you now. I was uninterested a second ago. But.
And he he was like, yeah, when we got on the motorway and he just like put his foot down and it just kept pulling and pulling and pulling. And then it was so quick. And I was like, oh, that is amazing. Like I can see that you are genuinely having this experience. And I feel a little bit of sadness inside me that if I get in that car, I will not have the same experience you've had.
It's awful, isn't it? It's awful. We're so spoiled. And totally, blinkered and blindsided. And that's the one thing I hate about, not hate, that's so strong, but the one thing, it's a frustration. If you ever work with anything you're passionate about, you become jaded. You just do. We're too exposed to amazing stuff. So
no, it is. My video's just camera's run out of battery or something. So
well, that's perfect timing.
That's what that is.
Okay.
But thanks very much for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me back. I really appreciate it. And fingers crossed we'll be able to meet up and do something face to face soon enough.
Sweet.
Awesome, pal.